It's pretty bloody easy for the rich Muslim countries who are absolutely awash in, I would say, undeserved oil money to moralize about the superiority of their culture.
Undeserved oil wealth? Look, Muslims need to understand when you're dealing with Western kuffar, you're not actually dealing with ignorance. There's a misunderstanding on our part. You're dealing with arrogance, not ignorance. Ignorance can be remedied by information. It can be remedied by education and so forth. You can teach ignorant people, but you can't teach arrogant people. Arrogant people cannot learn. They can't learn anything until they've been humiliated. And in fact, arrogance is always just the precursor to humiliation. Undeserved wealth, he said. Undeserved wealth. Well, let's talk about undeserved wealth, by all means. Let's talk about Europe. You know, the Europe that Jordan Peterson thinks is the pinnacle of civilization and achievement. Well, Europe would still be wallowing in the mud and battling plagues, and they'd still be tearing each other to pieces in endless wars, internecine wars, continental wars, if they hadn't spent centuries pillaging the global south to make themselves rich. And no, wealth that is obtained through uncivilized means does not civilize you. You got richer, but you sure didn't get better. Your industrial revolution was built on the backs of stolen resources. You have to acknowledge that fact. It was built on stolen resources and enslaved labor. Cotton from India, sugar from the Caribbean, gold and diamonds from Africa, on and on. Entire continents were drained dry to fund Europe's prosperity, not to mention the misery that you inflicted on your own peasantry, on your own workers, creating one of the most ruthlessly classist societies in history. Even at that time, your fancy aristocrats were still defecating right where they stood, in their own palaces. I mean, you were so brutal to each other that your own people ran away from you and started America. That's how that started. They're trying to escape from you. But they were all just people from your same so-called civilization, so they were just as brutal as you. They weren't any better than you. They were escaping from you, but they weren't better than you. They just copied you, and they took it even further. I mean, America, land of the free, land of freedom and opportunity. Let's be real. There would be no America without the genocide of the indigenous people, without the theft of their land, and without the transatlantic slave trade. There would be nothing called America today without those heinous crimes. Is that wealth deserved? Is it? I mean, while we're on the topic of oil wealth, let's talk about America's deserved oil wealth, state by state, massacre by massacre, and theft by theft. What do you see when you see a picture of the Texas oil fields pumping millions into the pockets of American oil companies? Well, I'll tell you what I see. I see indigenous genocide. That's what I see. Texas was home to the Comanche. It was home to the Apache. It was home to the Kanankawa, the Native American tribes. Well, they were all displaced. They were all slaughtered, or they were infected with diseases by settlers. The U.S. Unilaterally annexed Texas after the Mexican-American War, which is just a war that was built on lies and greed, but that's a whole other topic. That's not wealth that's deserved. That's wealth that's soaked in blood. You can't deny that history. What about North Dakota? That's another fracking area. Same story. Broken treaties, stolen land, massacres like the Whitestone Massacre, systematic destruction of the Lakota, the Dakota, the Mandan tribes, while oil pipelines like the Dakota Access Pipeline desecrates what lands that those people hold sacred, violates indigenous sovereignty. Is that deserved wealth? No, it's theft. It's wealth by deception and violence. What about Oklahoma? You've heard of the Trail of Tears? The death march where thousands of Cherokee, thousands of Creek Indians, so-called Indians, and Seminole people, Native Americans, died. That wasn't just a tragedy, it was theft on an industrial scale. They forced Native Americans into Oklahoma, off of their original lands. They forced them into Oklahoma, and then they stole the land that they gave them when oil was discovered there. That's the real story of oil wealth in America, but I assume that that's all deserved. This is how you come to deserve your wealth, apparently. You Viking, you marauder. You think that God accidentally put your wealth and your resources in other people's lands, and you just have to come over there to collect what is rightfully yours. It's been misplaced by God in other people's lands. That's what underlies Jordan Peterson's indignation. Because look, in Saudi Arabia, oil exists under their land. It's theirs. They didn't colonize the world to get that oil. They didn't take it from anybody. They didn't wage any wars to get the oil that's underneath their land. They didn't commit genocide to get the oil that's underneath their land. They didn't enslave entire peoples so that they could claim the oil that's beneath their own land. That wealth came from natural resources which they inherited by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their land, not from the misery of others. But the West can't fathom this. Why? Because their entire empire is built on the opposite principle. Take what doesn't belong to you, then justify it with some twisted sense of moral superiority. Look at this nonsense he said about Saudi Arabia being a wandering tribe lost in the desert. That's classic Orientalist garbage, reducing an entire people, an entire region, to caricatures of backwardness. I mean, do you even know what came out of the Arabian Peninsula? Islam came out of the Arabian Peninsula. The Arab tribes delivered that religion to the world. And they delivered with it a civilization, a legacy of art and science and philosophy that preserved knowledge when Europe was still burning witches and when their own filth caused the Black Death. That's what was going on in Europe. That's what came out of Europe. That's what comes by your own natural capabilities. No, the Arabs weren't lost in the desert. They were building cities and they were building structures. Cities and structures that stand until today. They were founding universities, libraries, centers of learning, advancing mathematics, astronomy, medicine, so on, and engineering. While Europeans couldn't even figure out basic hygiene. Lost? No. The West was lost, and they had to borrow a map from the Muslim world just to find their way out of the Dark Ages, and they still couldn't make it. What would Europe look like today without the centuries of brutal colonial conquest? What would Canada look like, Jordan Peterson, if they hadn't wiped out the indigenous people? No, if the West had actually stayed within their borders in Europe and actually traded fairly with people, respecting the sovereignty of other nations, well, they would be nowhere near the global hegemon that they claim to be today. They'd be a backwater. So let's not pretend that this so-called moral high ground that you're standing on isn't in fact a mountain of skulls. You're standing on a mountain of bodies and calling it the moral high ground. And all the wealth that you have today belongs to those bodies. But what exactly is your definition of deserved wealth? Is it wealth that's derived from slavery, from looting, from genocide, from bombing nations into submission? Is it wealth that gets extracted by force through predatory loans and IMF austerity programs? Is it wealth that's acquired through bullying and intimidation? No, if we're starting to measure deservedness, well, then the West is sitting on the most undeserved pile of wealth in human history. It's stolen. It's blood money. It's the fruit of exploitation. It's the fruit of genocide. It's the fruit of ecological destruction. It's the fruit of oppression, injustice, and tyranny. That's why all these types, all these Jordan Peterson types, why they all rant about so-called open borders, because they don't want the people that they stole from to come over to where they took their stolen goods. Why, if Africans and Asians and Central and South Americans, if they want to come over to America or come over to Europe, well, they're not doing anything but coming over to where all of their own stuff has been displaced. They're coming over to the countries that were built by their own wealth. Every country in the global South deserves the wealth of their own resources. And Jordan Peterson, you can just cry about it. We know you're good at that. You're always ready to shed a tear for any young white men who feel disenfranchised from their undeserved supremacy. So go ahead and cry about Saudi Arabia's oil wealth that you don't get to take. Because if you took the collected tears of all the victims of the West and unleashed them upon Europe and upon America, well, there wouldn't be a single city that wasn't underwater.